constitute democracy. That is very, very important. We have to make a lot of effort. But as long as that basic elements are understood, the way to realize the democratic process can be different from country to country.
Yes, but your definition of democracy is selection of representatives through a process of elections. That is not democracy. That is only the procedure for democracy. Democracy itself is a relationship between the government or the ruler and the ruled, and that there has to be a sense of responsibility between the ruler and the ruled. In Iraq, 1,000 years ago, you had a king, Harun al-Rashid, who was a king, but who used to go out every night to go and sit in different cafes all over the town to ask people what is it that they wanted, and he would do it in disguise. And now that is total democracy. Why is it that you confuse the concept of democracy with the procedure of democracy? And I'd like to bring this over to Master Farhadi, because please don't tell us that Afghanistan has not known democracy for 1,000 years, and it is only yesterday that it has discovered democracy. There has been a relationship between the rulers and the ruled in all these countries, despite its following a totally different technique. The technique was not elections, representatives, etc., but a relationship.
Well, I don't know. I think that this procedure is very, very, very important element of democracy. I mean, as long as your representative is selected through the elections, then that means that leader is accountable to those who elected him. And so the best way to preserve the essential part of democracy is to maintain these basic procedures. I believe that is.
Master Farhadi, have you been non-democratic until last week?
No, I think that we had elections in the late 60s, we had elections, but of course, the elections which happened in the last weeks was in a way more in a modern ways, but in Afghanistan has not changed very much, and I can say that in spite of the fact that there is in these elections in Afghanistan, we had all the characteristic of what's happening in all countries, including the accusation directed towards Mr. Karzai that there was in Afghanistan some irregularities in the elections, and then the ballot boxes were, lock was opened, and some. This happens in all countries in their own ways. But in what is in Afghanistan very important is that since more than 1,000 years, Afghanistan is a Muslim country, and there is this conception of justice, and justice for many modern scholars of Islam is democracy, and therefore democracy is just the result of the respect you have for justice, and it is this is based on their beliefs, and therefore I think this is important. And as far as the people they select in the elections leaders who are according to their assessment is supporters of justice or supporters of justice, I think it will give good results. But in the life of human being, again, I say that everything is gradual, and everything is relative, and you have to have more experience for improving even if you have reforms, and in spite of that, you need time and decades for improvement.
Master Haraguchi, we haven't quite answered that first question. In Iraq, do you see a problem between kin and non-kin? In other words, a tribal problem or even a fragmentation problem which could impact on the elections?
Well, it could impact very, very much. But you see, I'm not now recalling the day when I was in university and we learned the theory of democracy. And I think the origin of the word democracy comes from the meaning that the political system, which is governed by the voice of the people. I think that is origin of the word. And of course, as you said, there might be many ways, and sometimes the tribes will become important, but they are also a part of the people, right? And throughout the history, there are many ways to try to reflect the views of people, I'm sure. But over the many, many years of the history, I think the majority people have come to a conclusion that best way to reflect in the most fair way the voices of people is through elections. And so even if we conduct the election in Iraq, the interest or the voices of the tribes might be very heavily reflected in that election result, but there is no other alternative. And under the circumstances, we believe that it is the best way to realize the democracy under the circumstances. That is the reason why we have been emphasizing the importance of the election.
Over to Roger Williams for a couple of questions from that end. Go ahead.
Good morning, Ambassador Kamal, and good morning, distinguished guests. I'm Catherine Hall, and I'm here with my students from my critical writing class that is looking at issues about the United Nations, and they have some questions for you.
Hi, I'm Mike, and I'm a sophomore political science major. In the case of Iraq, what are some of the major domestic obstacles in implementing a democratic government to an area that has never seen democracy?
Okay.
Hi, I'm Sarah Consolati, and my question is, how do you feel about President Bush's decision to disregard the UN and its support during the war in Iraq?
Okay. Now, you have a choice. Which one of you wants to commit suicide first?
I don't want to.
The question is, let's take the second question first. The Secretary General has stated on the record that this war is illegal. He used the word illegal. And for a year, we have been discussing among ourselves that this war in Iraq does not fall either under Article 42 of the Charter or under Article 51. Afghanistan, incidentally, falls under 51, but Iraq does not. And so there is obviously a disregard of the United Nations Charter in the action taken in Iraq. Now, the United Nations Charter is a treaty which has been signed by all of us, including the United States. In fact, I will go further to say that the Charter of the United Nations was actually drafted by the United States. And so their own draft of their own treaty, which they themselves signed, has been rendered, quote unquote, illegal by their action. Now, this has enormous consequences for the United Nations. And I'd like you to examine what are the consequences. And then, of course, do address the obstacles in Iraq. Briefly, how do you see them?
Okay, let me answer the second question first. I don't think the action by the several countries in Iraq is illegal, as asserted by the Secretary General. The Security Council had a resolution to allow the measures against Iraq